an ICE facility in Texas last week. William Lajeunesse reports.
Friday night near Dallas, this group lures two unarmed ICE agents into a parking lot by firing fireworks at their door and spray painting graffiti on their personal cars in the parking lot, mark number 1. Now, about the same time, a police officer responds to a 911 call. Two men fire 20 to 30 rounds from a tree line nearby, hitting the officer and forcing the agents to take cover. Moments later, deputies arrive. So court records reveal extensive planning and a lot of anti-government literature. This is one of several targeted attacks on agents.
The Justice Department is suing the state of California over Title IX violations. The lawsuit was filed against California Department of Education and the California Interscholastic Federation. It cites Governor Gavin Newsom's own words, calling biological males competing in women's sports, quote, deeply unfair. Education Secretary Linda McMahon says this is something that President Trump campaigned on.
It is just totally unfair to have men competing against women in sports, and also to share their intimate locker facilities, etc. And women fought hard for these rights, and it is the law, and the president means business with it.
A provision of the big, beautiful law that President Trump signed last week has been blocked, at least for now. Steve Jordahl reports Planned Parenthood found a federal judge to restore its taxpayer funding.
The new law put a one-year moratorium on Medicaid funds paying for abortions. Planned Parenthood ran to a judge in Boston who put a 14-day temporary restraining order on that provision. But American Family Association attorney Steve Crampton says there are some problems with the ruling.
The judge's order, as best I can tell, does not comply with some of the basic requirements of the federal rules with regard to such emergency action.
Specifically, Crampton says, stating why the injunction was ordered and its specific terms. He says the order was also sprung on the government.
This temporary restraining order, TRO, was issued without notice to the government. So they didn't even have an opportunity to respond.
He says the court order is not subject to the recent Supreme Court ruling banning universal mandates from lower court judges because of the type of injunction the judge, an Obama appointee, applied.
A temporary restraining order like this is not reviewable on appeal, but for very extreme circumstances. So, in effect, this is a bulletproof order for at least a very short time.
But he says the Trump administration's getting good at parrying these political attacks from the courts for all the practice it's been getting.
I would characterize this as another classic lawfare undertaking.
I'm Steve Jordahl.
And finally, the Trump administration will now let people use rent payments to help them qualify for a mortgage.
FICO scores are used in mortgage underwriting traditionally, but now the Federal Housing Finance Agency says Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac can also use what's called a Vantage score that incorporates a borrower's rent payment history to determine if they qualify for a mortgage. Well-needed relief for millions of Americans struggling to buy a home, often for the first time. Historically, about 2 million people each year get the keys to their very first home. You remember that day. You got your keys. But last year, that number sunk to an all-time low, 1.1 million.
More news online at afn.net and download the AFN mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
The American Family Association's mission is to inform, equip, and activate individuals to strengthen the moral foundations of our culture. We also support the church. Our goal is to be a leading organization in biblical worldview training for cultural transformation. AFA aims to evangelize the lost and disciple the believer. We aim to strengthen biblical marriages and equip parents to raise godly children.
Thank you for standing with the American Family Association. We inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to The Core here on American Family Radio. Walker Wildmon here with you on this live edition of the program. and we'll have some special guests with us in the next two segments. Let's turn our attention to the scripture. Proverbs chapter 16 is where we have been this week, and looking at verse 12 here. It is an abomination for kings to commit wicked acts, for a throne is established on righteousness. It is an abomination for kings to commit wicked acts, for a throne is established on righteousness. That's Proverbs chapter 16, verse 12. And that scripture there gives us one of a variety, a multitude of evidence that government is not just a institution created by God, but it is also a institution that was intended to be righteous, that was intended to do justice. And that's why we have government as we know it today. So that directly runs counter to the a lot of the modern secularist claims that government is this man-made concoction and that it can be, whoever's in charge, they should just be able to get their way and things like that. That's not the way government was intended. And when government strays from its God-ordained purpose, great evil exists. Great evil happens. And we've seen that throughout human history. And so this is why it's important that we're constantly reminding our elected officials and our citizenry that government is a God-ordained institution, and it exists to be an agent of justice, an agent of righteousness. And when it loses track of that, great injustice will occur. There's no doubt about that. Well, we've got some travel coming up over the next 6 to 8 months, and I just want to mention a couple of events that we have coming up. In early October, we're going to be here in Tupelo at a weekend with AFA. This is our first ever weekend with AFA. It's a 3-day event here in Tupelo, Mississippi. We're going to be having great fellowship, speakers. We're going to be having a reception here at our headquarters in our new facility, and speakers like Jerry Boyer with Boyer Research, Tim Barton with Wall Builders, Jenna Ellis will be here, and others at our weekend with AFA. That's October 2nd through the 4th. So if you want to join us here in Tupelo, you can simply go over to afa.net/events, afa.net/events, and you'll see that event there. Another event I want to mention is our tours, our spiritual heritage tours that we do each year. We have a few seats left for the Williamsburg portion of the September tour coming up. So the September tour, we have some seats available. You can go over to wildmongroup.com for more information on that. We'll also be going to Israel and Greece in March of next year, which is just right around the corner. In March of 2026, we'll be doing Greece and Israel back to back, and you can do both or just one or the other, whichever your preference is there. That's also at wildmongroup.com. Well, let's jump into a couple news stories while we have time this segment. This Texas flooding is just tragic. That's the only way to put it. And it rivals the what we saw in Kentucky last year as far as the magnitude of damage and things like that. I want to play a clip here. This is of an individual who was actually on the ground in the hours after the flooding from Texas. His name's Brandon Herrera. He's a resident in Texas, and listen to him describe the flooding impact here in Texas.
So we first went up the night of the 4th just to kind of get a feel for the situation. It's probably 30 minutes away from where we are. So these are our neighbors. These are people that we know in the community. And it was shocking to see. There's cars and trees. It's hard to believe just how violent the water is. I've seen floods before. I've never seen anything quite like this. I mean, the amount of force behind rushing water, it's breaking trees like toothpicks. It's got Conex containers up in trees. It's kind of insane, the devastation.
Well, there you have it. That's just a brief clip on some of the damage that was done and the impact. Of course, there's over 100 fatalities at this point and over 100 missing still. They haven't recovered, so that fatality count will unfortunately continue to rise as the days go on. The other clip I want to play here, and then we'll kind of talk about this situation that's a tragedy, is the extent of the damage, meaning how far did this go? This is clip 2. Let's listen.
Well, there was one that went pretty viral of a woman that was stuck in a tree. She was up in a tree, maybe 30 feet in the air, that they were finally able to get to. A woman in her mid-20s, which was awesome to see. There's a couple of stories of miraculous recoveries like that, but just with the violence of the water, you're finding people maybe 20, 30 miles from where they were picked up.
Wow.
This is, there's no good way to explain what happened as far as words to comprehend the human toll that this took and the fatalities and the families impacted and children missing. This whole thing is just very, very sad. When you look at it, I think we always, as humans, want solutions. We seem to want to fix things. And we tend to want to blame other people for problems. And this is one of those tragedies that is unexplainable. I mean, there's just nothing about it that is explainable in any way that makes sense for the human mind. And when you look at the likelihood of this level of flooding occurring in this area, I don't know. I haven't looked at the history, but I know for sure in Kentucky with last year's flooding, that was a 100-year event. That was a once in a century or more in some areas level flooding event. And I don't even know if it's likely that this is even worse than that, meaning this in Texas is like a 1 in 2 century event. Or maybe there is no recorded history of this level of flooding in that area ever happening before. I mean, there were just so many records broken on the rain and the flooding totals that this is just incomprehensible. Now, leave it to the media to try to blame somebody for this, right? In the early hours of this, they were blaming the National Weather Service. Well, President Trump cut the budget of the National Weather Service, and thus people died. I kid you not. I kid you not. That happened. Even though there is zero evidence to support that. But that doesn't stop people from making stuff up. Because after all, they want to go after Trump, right? It's all about going after Trump. And they've been trying this lazy game for the last 10 years. And here we are. The reality is that the National Weather Service put out multiple flood warnings and emergency alerts to the affected areas hours before there was any flooding. So the National Weather Service did their job, but who could have predicted this, right? Who could have predicted this level of flooding? And then, another part of it that is unexplainable is the fact that it happened at night. The fact that it happened at night, everybody's asleep, and nobody's thinking that, hey, my house is about to get swept away by water, and I'm sleeping. Who sleeps thinking their house is going to get swept away by water? So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking. There's going to be a lot of hindsight. Maybe there's some, warning systems that can be installed for tragedies like this to prevent them in the future. I'm sure there will be some solutions presented, but some things in life are just unexplainable. And this is why it is important to remember that God is sovereign, and this life is but a vapor in the wind. It's brief, and that we exist as humans for eternity. Our life on this earth is designed by God to prepare us for eternity. And how God uses tragedy for his purposes is very difficult to understand, especially when you're the one suffering, when you're the one hurting. But as we see throughout Scripture and throughout our lives today, God undoubtedly, every time, uses tragedy to draw people to himself. And to not oversimplify this, but to yet keep things easy to understand. When you understand the fallen nature of the world, these things are at least easier to comprehend. And I think that this is where the unbeliever gets way off track in their solutions to fix everything. Is the reality is this world is not intended to be perfect. Ever since the fall in Genesis, we live in a fallen world. And so this earth that we know today is not intended to be our final resting place. It is not intended to be our heavenly resting place. And so as long as we're here and until Christ returns, there's going to be suffering. There's going to be suffering. It doesn't matter how much technology we develop, how many warning systems we put in place, how much our medical technology and treatments advance. Now, we can do our part and be responsible stewards of God's creations and stewards of our bodies because he describes them as temples. So this isn't a lecture that we ought to neglect everything, right? And throw our hands up and lean into our fallenness and sin nature. That's not the case at all. But my point is that we're not the ultimate fixers here. We're not here to fix everything. And when you understand that, it really gives you a sense of peace. It gives you a sense of peace because as long as you think that fallen humans can fix everything and fix everybody's problems and relieve everybody of their illnesses and relieve everybody of their difficulties, then you're not going to have true peace because you're placing a false sense of responsibility and a false sense of power and control in your hands that ultimately you don't have. And this is the fundamental worldview difference between the believer and the unbeliever. Ultimately, God is sovereign. He uses circumstances, both good and bad, in this life to teach us about him, to draw us to himself. And our job is to prepare ourselves to the best that we can for our eternal resting place in heaven. And when you have that frame of mind, it's a little bit easier to go through difficulty.
Furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. In a 6-3 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court castigated the regressive use of nationwide injunctions by lower court judges. SCOTUS confronted the ideology that has driven the unconstitutional abuse and perversion of our justice system. Justice Barrett specifically took Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson to task when she said, "We will not dwell on Justice Jackson's argument, which is at odds with more than 2 centuries worth of precedent, not to mention the Constitution itself. We observe only this. Justice Jackson decries an imperial executive while embracing an imperial judiciary.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
Jesus' final words to his disciples were to go into all the world and teach the gospel, making disciples of all nations. For more than 27 years, Tomorrow Clubs International has faithfully answered that call by partnering with local churches in some of the world's poorest nations. Here's a report from a team leader.
When children learn to follow Jesus, they become disciple makers, influencing their families and friends. The gospel then overflows into the community, bringing repentance, reconciliation, church growth, and even reduction in crime and substance abuse.
More than 500,000 children have learned to follow Jesus through Tomorrow Clubs. Kids also learn practical life skills such as cooking, woodworking, and the English language, preparing them for a brighter future. To learn more about the life-changing work of Tomorrow Clubs International, go to tomorrowclubs.org. That's tomorrowclubs.org. All gifts are tax deductible.
Hello, everybody. I'm Walker Wildmon, Vice President here at American Family Association. Well, my brother Wesley and I were following in the footsteps of my dad, our dad, and my grandfather, Don Wildmon, by leading tours to places of the Bible. And so this next March, we're going to be going to Greece and following the footsteps of Paul. So we're so very excited about this trip, and we'll hope you'll join us. Here's a couple of the places that we're going to visit. We're going to visit Philippi, Thessalonica, Corinth, and all the various Greek cities that you read about in the book of Acts and Paul's epistles. And so you can find the dates, locations, pricing, and much more over at wildmangroup.com. You can also find out more about my dad's trip and my mom over to Israel. They're going to be in Israel in March as well. These trips are back-to-back, and you can do both if you would like. All the information about Footsteps of Paul, Greece, Israel, all of these trips in March of 2026, just visit wildmangroup.com.
At the Core podcasts are available at afr.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to The Core here on American Family Radio. Glad to have you with us on this edition of the program. Just a reminder, you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Just type in the name of the program, At the Core, and click the subscribe button, and the show will be queued up in your library each and every day. Well, I do want to introduce our guests that we have in studio, both guests today in studio, which is a rarity. Scott Burns is with us. He's founder of 7 Days for the Troops, and that ministry, that organization is headquartered here in Tupelo, Mississippi. And he's a Marine veteran, and he's with us now to talk about some of his work. Hey, Scott, welcome to the studio.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Tell us, before we get into your organization, the work you guys do, how long you've been around, things like that. Give us a little bit of your background. Give us your military background and your experience.
Well, I served in the Marines from 1991 to 1995. While I was in, I had injured my ankle, my left ankle, and had multiple surgeries on it from the time that I got out to probably 2012. I ended up having my left leg amputated right below the knee. Had that injury, dealt with it for 12, 13 years, and wore out the right ankle, had an ankle replacement done, and it'd be 3 years ago in November, that ankle replacement got infected and had to have it amputated. But originally from Jackson, Mississippi, and moved to Tupelo when I got out of the Marines. I actually worked here at AFA for a little while.
Nice. Yeah, Bobby mentioned that when he and I were talking about bringing you in. I said, that was before my time.
Before your time. That was, I want to say 97 time frame. And so, but loved it when I worked here. This place has definitely grown since 97. I've enjoyed watching it grow and watching buildings be torn down and stuff built and all the behind the scenes with that. But just love the work that AFA does.
So your organization, 7 Days for the Troops, once again, this is a nonprofit organization based near Tupelo here. And what year did you start the organization? And give us a little backstory. There's got to be a purpose and some kind of conviction that you had that this is something you want to do full time.
Well, we are in our 19th year, and basically what had happened was I was sitting at home. I was feeling bad because I really loved being in the military. I loved being in the Marines, and I was at that point of the Gulf War was going on, and I couldn't serve, and I was kind of depressed might not be the word, but just really disappointed, and I wanted to do something. And I saw a story where these kids were raising money to buy calling cards to send overseas. And I was like, you know what? I can do something to help them. And so I ended up calling the mall here in Tupelo and said, hey, I want to do something crazy. I want to build a tower in your parking lot out of scaffolding, and then I want to camp out on top of it for 7 days. And that was that we just called it a Support the Troops event. It was going to be a one-time deal, and then we ended up doing it the next couple of years, and we decided, a couple of years ago to form our own 501c3, because in the past we had teamed up and we helped like Cell Phones for Soldiers and the Wounded Warrior Project and other groups that were already helping veterans. But the only issue with that is there came a time where people knew we were raising money to help veterans, and they would come to us and say, hey, I know this veteran that can't pay a utility bill, or just different needs like that.
Yeah.
And because we're raising money for a different organization, we didn't have the freedom to go and take care of that veteran's bill.
Right.
And a lot of the groups that we were working with, that wasn't their mission. They were building homes, or they were doing, and so we couldn't just call them and say, hey, do you mind paying this bill? And so we wanted to still be able to help those organizations, but be able to help veterans as they reached out to us. And so 4 years ago, we formed our own 501c3, and that's where, how we got to where we're at now.
What's the primary? I know you guys probably do a lot of things. I'm not intimately familiar with your operation, but what are some of the things you guys do that you're most well known for, that you're good at as far as serving veterans?
The thing that I'm good, and not this going to sound like I'm bragging, but I'm good at raising funds.
Okay.
And so we're good at teaming up with other nonprofits, but the things that we do here locally are pay utility bills and pay. We even helped pay funeral expenses for a veteran that couldn't afford, to bury their child, and so we're known for helping in emergency situations. But the other thing that we're known for is we just finished our second project in conjunction with a group called Purple Heart Homes. They're based out of Statesville, North Carolina. But we've been able to build 3 tiny homes for veterans in North Mississippi. And those are things that people have recognized that we're doing. And because of those, I think people are reaching out to us more. And we're also of the mindset with 7 Days for the Troops is we can't help everybody.
Right.
But we've built a network and relationships with other organizations that we know who to reach out to, or at least point people in the right direction. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what's helped us grow and help us become a trusted veteran nonprofit. And we don't have a paid staff. We don't have, up until this year, nobody's ever gotten paid through 7 Days for the Troops. But we teamed up and we formed a chapter with Purple Heart Homes out of Statesville, and they've asked us, they came to me and said, hey, Scott, we like what you do. We want you to come help us, but we want to pay you to do it.
Yeah,
and
sure.
So that was something that, I talked to my wife about, and I was like, you know what, for 19 years, we've given. So it's okay. So they cover a lot of my expenses and things like that. But 100% of every dollar that's donated goes to help veterans. Everything that we've ever brought in, we've never paid any expenses. Our expenses are paid because we go and find sponsors to cover certain items that we need.
Yeah.
And so that's how we've built the reputation that we have, is people know that we're helping veterans. And that's, I think people like to know that when they donate just like when they donate to AFA, they know AFA's mission and they're doing that mission.
Sure.
Well, we've built that reputation over the last 19 years that if people donate to us with the hopes of helping veterans, it's going to help veterans.
Yeah, you're doing the work. Let's talk a little bit about veteran situations. And what I'm talking about is how I know homelessness amongst veterans is an issue. President Trump's been talking about that for 10 years or longer. What do you think is the driver here? I mean, obviously everybody's circumstances are different. And some people, whether it's self-inflicted or through external forces or trauma that they have serving. what seems to be like a common trend, not in a positive way, but what seems to be a common theme that is causing veterans to have difficulties, whether it's marriage difficulties or financial difficulties?
Well, I think on both cases, veterans are the world worst about asking for help. And so a lot of times I think veterans will get so deep in the woods that they feel like that there's no way out. And they don't take into consideration, and I can say this personally, when there's something going on with veterans, they don't think about the fact that what they're going through not intentionally affects the people around them. In my case, I had an injury that I dealt with, and I was being a Marine, and I'm like, I'm not going to tell anybody that I'm hurting and all this stuff going on. Well, I didn't realize until after I'd gotten some help that the relief that took off of my family. And so I think that's one of the big issues with veterans is not that they just don't care about themselves, but they don't want to tell somebody that they're hurting. That the macho part of being a veteran is not there, and that's with it's with the male Marines or the male veterans, the female veterans. There's something about going through that process that you feel like you can't ask for help, or you shouldn't ask for help, or that somebody out there deserves it more than you. And we get that. Most of the people, I would say 95% of the people that we help aren't veterans that reached out to us and said, hey, I can't pay my utility bill. Yeah. It's somebody reaching out for that veteran that says, hey, I know this veteran that can't. And so I think that's a lot of what's going on. And the VA system is broken. I think that we talked before we got on air. Yeah. I'm not of the mindset that the VA should take care of every problem that I have. But the problems that they should be taking care of, I think they're failing at. I think, if somebody gets injured in the military, then you take care of them. If somebody, has a mental issue because of the military, you take care of them. Now, if I go get myself in debt because I racked up, $25,000 in credit card debt, that's not the VA's responsibility to take care of that. Yeah. And I think that I believe, and there's a lot of veterans that feel the same way I do, is we should do away with the VA hospital. Like
the physical
buildings. Physical hospital itself. The best thing that's happened is, Trump started, I think Obama made this possible, but veterans being able to go get care in the community. The process still needs some work on it, but the fact that if I need a doctor for my ankle, I can go to a doctor here locally, and I don't have to drive 90 minutes to Memphis. Right. And I think that's another one of the problems with the system is before to get help, you had to go to like a Memphis hospital or Birmingham
to
from here.
VA facility. Well, the nearest facility.
Veterans don't want to take the time to do that. And if you've got a back that's hurting, driving to Memphis to get your back looked at doesn't make sense to me. Right. And so the system that they're working on, and I think that the new administration is like, it would make more sense to make, and I don't know if the wording right here is right, but why not make the VA the medical insurance kind of like Medicaid, Medicare, but for veterans?
Yes. Yeah, and facilitate the program, to your point. And then you're going to shift billions of dollars in taking care of facility fees and lighting bills and all this other stuff that's involved with setting up infrastructure, and you can just focus it on the care. Because the private systems out there are all over the place, right? There's a clinic on every corner, hospital systems in major cities, and so you can just funnel the money to the care instead of funneling that to the system per se. On that note, do you think this has momentum with the Trump administration? I think they've been doing so much, and granted, they've only been in office since January, so they still got 3.5 years left. But reforming the VA and doing creative things like you're talking about will probably take an act of Congress. And I'm not being sarcastic, literally an act of Congress.
It will take an act of Congress, and I will, I'm not a political expert, but I have realized that politics has gotten way too political. Yeah. It's party over people, and this is on both sides. And I got the opportunity to go sit in on a hearing where the Secretary of the VA, Mr. Collins, was being grilled, and nobody was listening to him. Like the Democrats, and I'm just going to do this because they were the ones doing it. The Democrats were so busy about trying to get the got you moment that they weren't listening to what he was saying. And one of the things that he was talking about was the care in the community program. And you had a senator that got up there and was bashing him because this veteran came to them and was needing this, this, and this. And she goes, or he asked, did you point her to care in the community? And then, of course, she didn't want to address that.
Sure.
But the solutions are there, but neither side, and I'd say this with the utmost respect, is neither side really wants to hear what the other side's saying. There's very few.
Yeah.
And I do believe that Donald Trump is willing to listen to both sides. Mm-hmm. Now, he may not 100% like what this side's saying. I don't think he 100% likes what the Republicans are saying.
Yeah.
But he's willing to work. He's willing to negotiate. And I think for us to grow as a country and to be where we need to be, that's where you don't have to sacrifice your beliefs and your standards to work with the other side. And I think we've gotten to a point in politics that you don't want to work with the other side because it means somebody else may get a victory.
Right. Yeah, and that's unfortunate, but it's so true because even when Biden's in the White House, a lot of the hearings were about scoring political points or trying to get somebody to stumble up and say something they shouldn't so you can pull their nomination. And then to your point about not listening to answers, I would venture to say the majority of those hearings up there are sessions where the people who like the person testifying is just going to amplify that. The people that don't like them, they're trying to do gotcha questions. And it's not really intended at actually getting to the root problem and fixing things, which is a very sad state of affairs. And I think the fiscal side of things with the debt is an indication of that too. The fact that nobody wants to fix it, they just want to blame each other for it. So it's very sad. I don't know what we do there. There's so much about our political system that's messed up. You're just going to have people that want to fix it in charge.
And the problem is, and I hear this. I'm 53 years old, and I've heard more in the last probably 10 years that we wish some good Christian people would run for politics, or you hear Christians saying there's no good people in politics. Then run.
Yeah, that's right.
And well, I don't want to get in there because of how bad it is. Well, that's the problem. Is everybody wants to complain about how bad it is, but nobody wants to fix it. Nobody wants to get in there and get their hands dirty.
Yeah.
Well, if you have good people that have standards, and I look at Brother Don when he started this. He was the enemy of the people. And if he would have just stopped, not really, but that's the way people treated him.
Yeah, he was framed.
He was framed as the enemy of the people. So he could have just said, you know what, the fight is too hard.
Yeah.
And gave up. And look at what he's built with protecting our families and not everything that, AFA has done, everybody should 100% agree with.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that there's done anything bad, but
sure.
If you agree with 100% of something everybody's doing, then
that's unrealistic.
It's unrealistic.
Yeah.
So
I joke and tell people who I disagree with or disagree with me, whatever, that I don't even agree with my wife on everything. So you expect me to agree with you on everything? That's just not reality. Now we can agree on the fundamentals,
that's
right?
It.
And then go from there. But we need more serious people in Washington that are in it for the country and for the people, and not in it for re-election or money or whatever else is going on up there. And we need good people to run for office, to your point.
Pick the fights for the right reason.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, Scott, thanks for coming in.
I appreciate y'all having me.
All right. And what's your website for 7 Days for the Troops?
The number 7daysforthetroops.org. 7daysforthetroops.org.
Excellent. All right. Scott Burns, founder of 7 Days for the Troops. Thanks for coming in. We'll see you in just a few minutes.
I am thoroughly looking forward to our Weekend with AFA coming up in October, where we're going to be able to meet our supporters like yourself, to fellowship, to visit our facilities here in Tupelo, and to have everyone come together for a wonderful weekend.
It's a Weekend with AFA, Thursday, October 2nd through Saturday, October 4th in Tupelo, Mississippi. Speakers will include Abraham Hamilton III, Jenna Ellis, Tim Barton, Tim Wildmon, and more. Register at afa.net/weekend. When you hear this
This is American Family News.
You know what follows is the truth. Your news from a Christian perspective.
Hundreds of teachers are going to have to walk into that school building, and they are forced to swallow political ideology that in many cases violates their very faith and conscience.
If you miss it at the top of the hour, American Family News podcasts are available at afn.net. And sign up for our daily news brief at afn.net. Culture really doesn't like to line up with God's Word. In our age of instant information and misinformation, where do you find the truth about the gender confusion being spread by the world?
The truth is ours to discover if we'll just open the Word of God and seek Him.
You can go from Ephesians 5 to Ephesians 6 in the instruction for fathers to instruct their children. There it's noteworthy that explicitly the fathers are given a role in instructing the children.
I think modern day women are taught, when we think of submission in terms of quiet, never saying anything and being an obedient robot, that's not what Scripture teaches. It doesn't mean a blind acquiescence.
In His Image is a life-changing documentary that answers those controversial questions from the only source for real truth, the Bible. See In His Image for the first time or watch it again, and invite your family and friends to watch as well. Visit resources.afa.net. resources.afa.net.
When I asked my wife, what are the best free things in life, she quickly said, grandkids. I laughed and I said, Karen, I said free. Grandkids are expensive. Still, some of life's greatest joys cost nothing. A kind word, a familiar smell, sand between your toes, or a sunset. All are free gifts from God. But the greatest free gift is salvation. In Acts chapter 8, Simon tried to buy the power of God, but the apostles made it clear, God's gift cannot be bought. It is given by grace. Salvation, joy, and peace are free to us because Jesus paid the full price. And once we receive that gift, it's ours forever. If you have Jesus, you have everything. For more daily encouragement, go to ingraceradio.com.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Walker Wildmon.
Welcome back to the last segment of the program. I'm laughing because my wife heard me and she texted me.
I knew it was coming.
And she put a laughing face with and said, telling everyone on the radio that you don't agree with everything I say. Oh, man. So telling the truth gets me in trouble. No, she's joking, but I'm glad she was listening. At least she didn't hear it from somebody else.
That's right.
You know, yeah, you know what Walker said about you on the radio? But it is so.
He says he doesn't listen to you.
Yeah, it is so true. You know, this kind of false expectation that everybody thinks like you do and everybody ought to agree with you. It's just not realistic. So
that's actually scary, I think.
Yeah, it is scary to expect that. And I'll end on a light note. The disagreements Lexi and I have are about where we're going to dinner, or should we have gone to dinner through this path through town or through the other path, and which one's quicker?
It's like you're sitting in my car.
Yeah. So we're not disagreeing on the fundamentals or how to parent. So find unity in the things that matter. That's the memo of this previous segment. All right, Jameson Taylor's with us, Dr. Jameson Taylor, and he's usually remote on the phone or on video, and he's in studio with us to talk about some of the political ongoings, both at the state level and in Washington, D.C. Jameson, welcome back.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, you joked and said, what are we going to talk about as we were coming into the show? And the reality is we often don't know what we're going to talk about until we're here. But that's the good thing about live radio. No, I wanted to get your thoughts and your honest feedback on President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, because you and we've been working on that the last month or two pretty heavily. And then we can talk about some of the state level stuff that we're doing, the more impactful stuff. But the One Big Beautiful Bill, Jameson, the problem with it as far as analyzing it is it does a lot of different things.
Oh, yeah.
And so we've got border wall funding, which is great. We've got defunding of Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers for 12 months, good. And then there's other stuff provisions dropped in the bill, some of which we'll probably find out as we read it in the coming days. But what's your overall kind of assessment of where we are with that legislation?
Well, the one thing about it was that it is must-pass legislation, and you saw with Trump, he invested in this heavily. House and Senate leadership invested in this with this deadline of get it done by July 4th. They met the deadline. So the first thing is the Trump administration and the Republican leadership, they did what they said they were going to do. Now, are there things in the bill that we don't like? Yes. For instance, the House started off with cutting funding for abortion providers at 10 years. The Senate ultimately reduced that to 1 year. They said it was because of the parliamentarian. I don't buy that. Senate leadership is really the one that's making this decision. Nevertheless, we got a win there. We're defunding abortion providers. And what that means is that people's taxes, especially through the Medicaid program, are no longer going to abortion providers. Now, it is such that tax money is not technically being used to pay for abortions due to something called the Hyde Amendment, but Planned Parenthood is getting about half of its funding through Medicaid, and we know that it's Medicaid, which again is people's state and federal taxes, is paying for Medicaid. These clinics are getting Medicaid funding. It's a huge part of their budget.
We were subsidizing them.
Yeah, we're subsidizing them, and they're not providing high quality health care. If you want high quality health care, go to a different facility.
Which is a myth. That's a myth that's thrown out there by the left, is that they're providing life-saving, critical health care.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get care for instance, to deliver your child, and they say that they offer maternal wellness care. They're getting federal funding to quote unquote offer maternal wellness care. Are you really going to go to an abortion facility for that? No, you'd be crazy to do that. So they're giving awful subpar care. They've been exempted in many states from safety regulations and things like that. There's not a good reason to go to these providers. They don't serve the American public, and really they do a disservice to low-income people that are on the Medicaid program. And that's one of the problems with Medicaid, that the quality for what we pay, we're not getting good quality. It's not good health coverage. It does not in the end offer good health care, such that mortality rates on Medicaid are higher than for other programs. So that's another thing that they did in the One Big Beautiful Bill that is pretty exciting. Basically invited states requiring them to get more involved in Medicaid and to get more involved, carry some of the burden with food stamps. So we talk about what is the One Big Beautiful Bill. Well, okay, first, what it does is it renews the Trump tax cuts. So it's a tax bill in a sense. And it's important to realize that it's not cutting taxes, it's preventing taxes from going up.
Correct.
So, when people assess the bill, when they go to the polls in the future, think about this. The One Big Beautiful Bill prevents your taxes from going way up. The second thing that the One Big Beautiful Bill is, it's a legislative package of a bunch of different things. And so some of the more important things in that bill would be related to Medicaid reform. And part of that is a work requirement for able-bodied adults without kids. Now, these people should be working anyway, and we've seen the studies, we've run the data. We see that when these people get a job, they actually turn their lives around pretty quickly, and they go from making no money, because half of this expansion population, they're making no money. This is not the working poor, contra Josh Hawley and others. This is not the working poor. These are people that are not working at all. You get them off of Medicaid, and they're going to go off of Medicaid once you require work. Why? Because again, go back to what we said before, Medicaid offers terrible health care coverage. Nobody actually wants to pay for it. So once you say, no, you're going to have to work to get this, they say, you know what? I'm just going to go get a much better job and get much better health care coverage. So that's what we're going to see is these people are going to come off of Medicaid. They're going to turn their lives around. They're going to get good jobs, support their families. But likewise with food stamps, there are new requirements in the bill that require those up to age 64 to basically work in order to receive food stamps. And again, we're talking about able-bodied adults. It shouldn't be that you just start collecting food stamps once you turn 60 and if you can still work.
Right.
And so they're telling the states, hey, you're going to have to implement this work requirement. Several states were already doing that. So this just codifies this for the rest of the country. There are other things in the bill that cracks down on welfare reform. As you mentioned, there's immigration enforcement. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of good things in the bill. Now, could the bill have been better? Yes. And I think it could have been better, in particular, if the Republicans had been better at working together. We look at folks like Rand Paul.
Yeah.
Okay, because Rand Paul did not support the bill, he was just not going to support it.
From the beginning, he didn't support it.
Yeah, but there was no sitting down with him and saying, come on, how do we get you to yes?
Right.
Instead, who did Rand Paul hand the keys to? Lisa Murkowski.
Liberal Republican.
Liberal Republican from Alaska.
Yeah.
So which state, I want you to guess, which state benefits the most from the one big beautiful bill?
Probably Alaska.
Niche tax cuts for like whaling captains, Alaska.
Yes.
So
And you're not exaggerating.
Yeah. And no, not at all.
Yeah.
And so Kentucky, you need to reach out to Rand Paul and say, hey, come on, man.
Yeah.
You need to do better than this. You're supposed to be a conservative Republican. Let's not shoot ourselves in the foot. You know, yes, stand with your principles, but make sure you get something out of it at the end of the day instead of handing the keys to a liberal Republican who's supported by big abortion groups and literally by Democrat groups.
Well, and to your point, to contrast Senator Paul with somebody else, Senator Ron Johnson, he came out and said, I don't like the bill as it's written today, but I'm willing to work with the White House to make it better. And he ended up doing some things to make it better. But to the contrary, Senator Rand Paul comes out and says this bill is terrible and I'm not voting for it, and that takes him out of the negotiation when he says that on the front end. And so, and then instead, to get the 51 votes needed, Senator Thune, the majority leader, had to go to another holdout, which was Murkowski, because the remaining holdouts were all liberals: Susan Collins, Tom Tillis, and Lisa Murkowski.
Yeah.
And he had to offer something. This is the nature of politics. He had to offer something to get her vote. And he did. He offered different incentives for Alaska. But what do you think about on the Medicaid and the welfare reform? That makes up a large portion of our budget, specifically the mandatory portion of our budget. And when I say mandatory, I literally mean the way Congress has set it up. These programs get funded automatically.
Yes.
There's no like they get this amount of money and if they run out, it's over. They get funded in perpetuity unless Congress intervenes. And so I mention that because it relates to the debt. One of the reasons our debt and deficit is growing at the rate it is because our mandatory programs continue to grow. They keep adding people to the programs who qualify under new rules, and they never take anybody off.
Yes. The thing to understand about Medicaid and why it's so important is that it's what's called an open-ended entitlement, meaning it's an open-ended welfare program. Once you get on Medicaid, whatever costs that you incur, the government pays for it. But it's also paid for by state governments and the federal government. Medicaid, even though the states are not paying for the majority of Medicaid is busting state budgets in every state. And that's less money for K-12 education. That's less money for safe roads and bridges. That's less money for everything that you want your state government and you expect your state government to cover. And instead, what is Medicaid covering? Okay, they're covering illegal aliens, which is one big, beautiful bill.
They were covering abortion providers.
Yeah. And illegal aliens, by the way, are not even eligible for Medicaid, but the Biden administration made it very difficult for states to check eligibility.
And they were giving them Social Security numbers.
Yeah. And
to sign up.
And they're covering folks that don't even want to work to keep their Medicaid. And so that's what the one big beautiful bill cuts in terms of quote unquote cuts in terms of Medicaid. Right. We're not really removing folks from Medicaid. We're reforming the program, and we're looking to save some money by closing loopholes that criminals and fraudsters and others are taking advantage of.
Yeah.
But when we think about what can we cut, if you're really concerned about the budget, if I'm Rand Paul, then what can we cut? We can cut our welfare programs. Why did Democrats like Obama, like Biden, why did they open the door wide to welfare, including tons of welfare fraud?
Yeah.
Why? Because when Republicans get on welfare, they start to vote Democrat. Welfare is a get out the vote program for the Democrats. And that's why when they get in office, they do everything possible to expand welfare programs, including getting people on that are not even eligible, including people that are making six figures a year that are signing up for food stamps and Medicaid and things like that, and not really checking, do you have a yacht? Do you have a second home somewhere else? Not even checking if you live in the particular state that you signed up for. But that is why welfare expands so much under Democrat administrations, whether it's at the state level or the federal level, because welfare is a get-out-the-vote tool for Democrats. And that's also why Republicans need to be laser focused on limiting welfare and do what Newt Gingrich and the Republicans did back in the day in the 90s, welfare to work. Because guess what? Once these folks get off of welfare, they go back to voting Republican because they see the money coming out of their paycheck to pay all these taxes. And they know, hey, there's all these people on welfare that are not doing anything. I used to be one of them.
Yes. Yeah, this, and Republicans have opportunities in the future over the next 12 to 18 months to do more of this because there can be another reconciliation package in the fall. And then one more before the midterm elections in a couple of years. But what you mentioned about the state portion of Medicaid is a big deal for people when they're asking if let's say they don't care about the debt, but they care about their streets and their bridges and their police departments and their services that they pay taxes for. The more these states, and this gets into Medicaid expansion, which I know you've been working on for several years, but expanding Medicaid, allowing Medicaid fraud, waste, and abuse, it eats away at the tax dollars available because states can't print money. Only the federal government can print money. And so states are going to have to decide, do we have new roads or do we keep adding millions of people to welfare and Medicaid? And that is seriously going to degrade the fundamental services that the government provides.
That's right.
The state government.
Yeah. And then one good thing that the One Big Beautiful Bill does is apply some of these same incentives now to food stamps, because this is going on in all of the welfare programs.
Yes.
Medicaid just happens to be the one that has the highest amount of fraud and that is hurting state budgets the most. But still, welfare expansion hurts states, it hurts their economies, and at least in the One Big Beautiful Bill, they're starting to crack down on that.
Yeah, and I know two examples firsthand of as far as talking to people over the last, let's say I'm 31, over the last 10, 15 years. I know one instance where the mother was deliberating on whether to have more kids based on what she was going to get paid per child. She was going to get compensated per child through the welfare system. I don't know which program it was. And then I know another example where a couple was de facto married. They had a child together, dwelling together, but not formally married or legally married. And the reason they weren't is because it was going to reduce their Medicaid benefits.
Yeah.
And so they said, well, let's just not get married. Well, they ended up getting married because it's the right thing to do. And in the long run, they'll be better off, not just morally, but financially as well. But the system, I guess, is what I'm getting at. The program is built in a way, in many regards, that disincentivizes good behavior, including getting married and getting a job. So hopefully some of that's about to change. Jameson, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, folks, there you have it. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll see you next time.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American